Well, hello everyone. My name is Zachary O'Shea, and this is Box of Teeth. So you have a collection of horror-themed monsters that you want to use for a D&D game, but you're not quite sure what to do with them. I'm going to go over an idea for you right now. Here in August, we're covering a specific antagonist and his minions that you can use for a horror-themed Dungeons & Dragons game, and that would be the Pariah. He's basically a riff off of the Mummy, except he's actually an aberration instead, and I'll talk about his origins a bit in a moment. But really, this video is talking about his minions and himself, as there are very specific in their horror subgenres, which are body horror, cosmic horror, and disease horror, and how to put them all together for a couple of adventure ideas or just a general campaign idea. First off, though, the subgenres that we're talking about with the Pariah and his minions are icky and they're uncomfortable, and many people perhaps are going to be turned off by them. Mostly the body horror and the disease horror. Cosmic horror's spooky, but usually isn't something that really disturbs people unless they think about it a bit too much. So you really want to make sure to talk to your players first if you're planning to use these monsters and say, hey, generally this is what it's going to be about. Is this something that's going to make people uncomfortable? If you need to use safety tools, if that's what your group does, do so. If it's just a conversation ahead of time, that's great too. Whatever it is that your group is decided on. Remember, horror should be fun. It shouldn't be something where you are trying to shock people if they're not expecting to be shocked. You don't throw in a horror movie at a family gathering unless everybody's gathered there to watch a horror movie. Now let's jump back to the Pariah, though. He's the prince of a long-dead kingdom that was wiped out by several strange plagues. He contracted them all himself, became an aberration, cannot die. He's quite insane, he's very mirthful, and he's very generous, except what he's giving out is diseases, and he starts with the lowest rungs of society and starts to corrupt them to become his servants and his throng, as he slowly but surely corrupts and takes over. He should always come across as jovial but menacing at the same time. Perhaps he doesn't really know what he's doing, but there might be an inkling here and there that he actually enjoys the suffering. Or if he doesn't, he just sees it as spreading joy, and why shouldn't he make people happy? There's two different avenues that are easy to go down with him. Either he's now newly arrived in an area or been there for a little bit, and the corruption is starting to spread and your heroes have to deal with that and stop it. Or he has all but destroyed a kingdom and your heroes have to go in, face a lot of horrors to find and destroy him and or rescue any survivors. The first group of these mutated horrors that your players are going to run across are all tier 1 monsters. The perfect pairing there is the mantled swine and the swineherd that just kind of went past right here. It's basically the person who is taking care of the pigs that is now turned into a large parasite that wants to infect others, and the pigs that are also infected with a different parasite. Both have a cephalopod mixed with a mammal feel to them. There's some clear body horror involved that's going to infect your players, and they have weird vectors of attack. The mantled swine doesn't have a mouth, so it can't chew or anything, but it gores them with vein-lined tusks that suck out some blood, and the swineherd has its own kind of strange attacks. Again, they're possibly going to catch some sort of disease, which now lets the players know that their characters are at risk of not only dying from damage, but being corrupted and changed into one of these monsters as well. Again, the swineherd also has an ability that makes the mantled swine better, so he's kind of the prime target for heroes to take out. Next, we have modeled sucklings, and for them, they're really the beggars and the dregs of society that fall under the Pariah's thrall very easily, but also succumb to disease very quickly because they don't really have the best nutrition and that sort of thing, and they're the biggest chance to mutate into these strange creatures. You could throw 1 or 2 against players at a time, or if they're higher level, a swarm of them that are sucking blood and infecting them with sewer plague. And they're just a nice, good fodder monster for your heroes to deal with, like a kobold infestation or orcs or basic gnolls, that sort of thing. They're like, oh, well, this is what the boss is going to have, a couple of these hanging around that we need to deal with. The really unpleasant thing for heroes, the model sucklings, is that they have regeneration more or less through sucking blood. They're basically human sturges in that sort of respect. So it can be hard to down them very quickly as they're healing hit points. So you want to make sure your players become aware of this quickly and have an ability to maybe plan and figure out how they're going to deal with these things, whether it's chill touch or just massive amounts of damage really quickly, or kiting them around so they can't really stick to people. Let your players develop those tactics. Next two minions that just whizzed past are the next level up when it comes to monsters. That is the Scabrous Elemental and the Seigeron. The Scabrous Elemental is a real heavy hitter because, again, it is an elemental and it's something that can challenge a tier 1 or early tier 2 party to the max because it is challenge rating 5. It can be a wandering monster they have to deal with in a city, or it could be something that's in an infected pool that is dedicated to the Pariah, perhaps some sort of mid-bosses heavy hitter minion. We'll talk about mid-bosses in a moment. The Seigerons are also there to provide kind of spice and a color to an area. They're probably not monsters that are going to be free roaming. They're really going to be in places that are dedicated to the Pariah just because of their nature and their kind of dominated minds. But you could twist them if you needed to be to have one that is especially intelligent and clever to be a mid-boss. Last, we move into his strongest of minions, that being the Scouring Gatekeeper and the Silverfish Behemoth. You could really use them as wandering monsters in any game. The Scouring Behemoth is kind of like a Chimera. It's going to come in, it's going to do a lot of damage, it's going to leave a lasting mark. The Silverfish Behemoth is there if you really have maybe some spellcasters, you want to make their life a little more difficult in an encounter. But they're also going to be found in places the Pariah has probably already taken over. The Scouring Gatekeepers are going to be the things that low-level players want to avoid, Tier 1 and early Tier 2, to try to get in the city, or it might be patrolling in a ruined city. And the Silverfish Behemoth are going to be places that infect centers of learning that the players may want to go to find out more about the Pariah, or perhaps get some scrolls of lesser restoration because they're going to need them, or to get other articles they might need or allies to deal with this threat. Lastly, I want to talk about mid-bosses. The Pariah himself is a higher challenge rating. Really, he's kind of that challenge rating that's going to be a campaign villain for most campaigns when you get to the end, and you're going to need other lesser antagonists for the players to be invested in and want to defeat. The issue here is most of the Pariah's minions are dull-witted and aberrations, and they're mutated, and they're underneath the Pariah's thrall, so they might not have a lot of personality. You could pick out a couple of them, such as a Swineherd or a Veiled Seigeron, to invest better stats in, give them a personality, make them a cut above the rest if you want to, but you may want to also resort to Warlocks that have a pact with the Pariah, other beings, whether it's a Death Cleric or a demon that is dedicated to disease that works with him, hand in hand. They might be corrupted by him, but also want to see him succeed, perhaps for their own dark, nefarious reasons. So there are a couple of ways to use these horror-themed minions for a game that you want to build, and maybe hopefully talking through this gives you some ideas if you've made your own gathering of monsters to really think about how am I going to use them at each level for each encounter to make a coherent narrative that the players can move through, and of course have emergent sessions within. Gives you that framework. You don't want to plan out every little thing. I'd love to hear how you would use them in your own game down in the comments below. Now, you can find the Pariah, all his minions, and hundreds more horror-themed monsters, all for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. They're all perfectly free at boxofteeth.blogspot.com. If you're more interested in the non-Dungeons & Dragons role-playing projects that I have, or the horror fiction that I write that includes grease paint right there, it is Book 1 in the Crimson Thread series. Book 2, Psychopomps, right here, comes out in just a couple of weeks. I'm super excited. It's out on the 30th. It's a nice, fun, scary read with some adventure in it as well. You can always go to www.zacharyoshay.com. As always, I really appreciate your time and your attention. I hope this was helpful, and have a wonderful rest of the day.